Topics and tea. Topics and tea. Topics and tea. Topics and tea. Welcome to Topics and Tea. Welcome to Topics and Tea. Hopefully, I can see all of your beautiful faces this morning. Looks like no one else is in the waiting room, so we will get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this lovely day. Hopefully, it's nice and sunny where you are as well. I should have said I am an Alexandria resident, but I am away visiting my wonderful parents, checking in on them, making sure everyone gets vaccinated. So this is our neighborhood edition of Topics and Tea. So again, welcome everyone to the third of 7 Tea and Topic sessions, or Topic and Teas. You know, it's been reversed a few times. That's okay. Yes, you've heard it right, though. For some of you who've been following us, we've added a 7th one on climate change, and that's going to be on May the 6th. So we are here with a familiar face in some Alexandria circles, but maybe new to others, Miss Aaliyah Gaskins, who is running for one of 6 seats on City Council. You can learn more about Miss Aaliyah at Aaliyah4, spelled out 4, alexandria.com, and I'll drop that in the chat. So the purpose of these sessions, it's for the public to start their morning with their favorite beverage. Hopefully you all have your beverage with you, to unwind and begin their day being heard as well as being informed. These sessions are meant to be informal. We have questions that residents have submitted in advance, and we'll also dialogue with those who had time to join us today. And for our guests, we don't expect the candidate to answer all questions in the hour we have, rather engage in that exchange of concerns and ideas. Key questions and themes from these dialogues will be summarized in the campaign's blog as well as on their social media. Welcome, Miss Barbara. I saw you just joined us, and I love your picture as well with your mask. So welcome again. So let's get this this tea and topic session started on neighborhoods with this first question. And this is going to be posed to Aaliyah as well as our attendees. So Aaliyah, let's set the atmosphere and start with an icebreaker for you and our callers. When I say the word neighborhood, what are your immediate thoughts?
Good question, and good morning, everyone. I have to just quickly say, my husband heard your theme song for the first time, and he just started like dancing in the hallway. So I was a little distracted. But I guess, let's see, what comes to mind for me is, and it's interesting because this is not the case where I live, because I live in a condo, but growing up, front porches were like a really big deal in my neighborhood. It's where we gathered. It's where people, I don't know, shared stories, shared probably neighborhood gossip a lot, but it's just a way that we always kind of looked out for each other. And I think when I think about front porches and building community, I just get excited about neighbors watching one another, neighbors having each other's back, and neighbors coming together to kind of celebrate the place where they live.
Front porches. I love me a good front porch. I grew up in Philly, and we had a front porch, and in my apartment, I don't have that, but I long, if I can be a homeowner in Alexandria, to have a front porch one day. So I also want to ask the same questions, though, to our attendees. When we say the word neighborhood, and this is anyone can start, what first comes to your mind?
So I'll chime in. I'm Fran Vogel. I live in the Strawberry Hill section off of Duke Street. And when I think of neighborhood, I actually think of all my neighbors. And we are pretty cohesive in our neighborhood. And most people know the people around on their block or the next couple of blocks or within their surrounding areas. So, and really, I've always believed it takes a village, and it does, and that we should all be responsible to each other to, make that where we are as livable as possible.
Beautiful, Ms. Fran. Thank you. Anyone else, when we mention the word neighborhood, what comes to mind?
Hi, this is Barbara Beach.
Hi, Ms.
Nice to meet you all. For me, neighborhood means walkability, means a sustainable environment where you can feel safe and comfortable to walk, to see people, and to basically be part of the community that surrounds you.
Beautiful. Walkability, sustainability, safety. Thank you. Anything else from Mr. Peter, Patrick, Daniel, Mimi? When we mention the words neighborhoods, what comes to mind?
I would say community, most importantly, and how a community can improve someone's life experience wherever they happen to be in their lives. My wife and I have lived on West Taylor Run, which sort of abuts the Clover College Park Civic Association and the Taylor Run Civic Association. And in the 24 years that we've lived here, you know, we were the young ones on the block at the time we moved in, and now I would say we're in the upper echelons of older residents. But
Wisdom.
it's nice to see the neighborhood change, older become younger, but there are a lot of challenges happening in the time that we've lived here. I think I posted an email earlier when you were asking for questions. Cut through traffic is a really huge problem that never used to be. That's sort of abated as a result of COVID, but I think most of us feel like that'll go right back up once everybody gets their vaccinations and people go back to work in offices. And then the other is stormwater. That's a problem in our area, probably not as severely as bad in other parts of Alexandria, but the issue with stormwater for us is one of culverts overtopping, which completely cuts off street traffic and emergency vehicles at Janney's Lane and West Taylor. But also because of the advent, you mentioned you've got a program coming up on climate change. Obviously, this is all due to that.
Yes.
In the 24 years that we've lived here, there's been, up until last summer, there was a grand total of 3 storm flood events in that time period. And last year there were 3 within a 6-week period. And beyond the culvert problem, we also now have issues where we're at West Taylor Run and we're at the bottom of a hill. Clover College Park goes up to our west, and the street just above us is Sky Hill, and our neighbors there, the volume of water coming down from these intense rain events are so significant that their downspouts are now like cannons firing water down the hill. We get flood events that are so significant, it's like flash floods. I mean, some of the videos that we posted and shared with the city are really quite ridiculous. So even addressing, so that issue is not a capital investment issue. That has to do with neighbors working with neighbors within a community construct and trying to find ways to mitigate water, and hopefully working together so that we can make this water go through our property, not into our properties.
Wow. Thank you for bringing those concerns to light. And we did receive your email this morning. So, and we're going to try to put that into some of the candidates' responses on today. So you'll get your full answer either live or via email. And if you ever want to, and I'll put it out there early, I believe with the campaign, if you ever want to do a meet and greet so you can dig into some harder issues, you know, one-on-one or within a group, then you'll be able to do that through a meet and greet as well. So we'll continue to discuss that, Mr. Peter. Mr. Patrick, I saw you shaking your head in agreement with Mr. Peter as he was talking. Did you, and I see that bundle of joy in your hands. And
I've been fitted in. Yeah, well, we made our way downstairs.
Did you want to, I didn't know if you were just in agreement, or did you want to chime in with something similar, or? Oh,
it's a problem. I mean, what Mr. Peter spoke is a major problem. But to your question, or to the point, and I think that this is similar to what Aaliyah was saying, it's familiarity, right? Neighborhoods are familiarity. And that's familiarity in neighbors, You know, that's familiarity in friends, that's familiarity in streets, and familiarity in concerns. You know, it's when we run into issues, they're the ones, you know, our neighborhood is who we discuss them with first.
Right.
Who we air out our concerns with, and who we, you know, justify our concerns. That's the first layer. So I'll leave it at that, but I don't mean to interject, but this is fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Daniel, I think you were about to chime in if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I'll just say it's to me it's common experience, and had a good conversation with Aaliyah and Patrick the other night about how we might do some more to enhance the common experiences along Eisenhower to give it more of a sense of place.
Mm-hmm.
I think for you know, the neighborhoods you live in, that's what that is. You know, the sort of shared purpose, familiarity, knowing your neighbors, things like that. But if you don't know it, or you're just investigating it for the first time, but at least here, we'd like to do more to say, like, you are actually on Eisenhower. I think word is out about things like Delray. People know, you know, I am in Delray right now, or soon I am in Potomac Yard. And that's something that we lack a little bit here. So we had a good discussion about that. I appreciate both of them for being there. Ways to enhance that on Eisenhower.
I didn't mean to interject. That's an excellent point, because I mean, I've been here since 2007. I can remember the first few years. I was like, what's my precinct? Where am I? Everyone has their own like kind of area. And I'm like,
Yeah.
What is this area? Like, I'm on Duke Street. Like, do I belong to this cohort or that? It can get really confusing. So
we actually have a hard time naming ours. I think it holds us back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when are you in Carlisle and when are you in Eisenhower East? There's a lot of back and forth about that.
Right. Excellent point.
I agree with you. When you know where you are and where your precinct is and who you can go to for, you know, for representation, who to talk to, then all kinds of things change. All kinds of things open up.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that, you know, there's this beauty of Alexandria, and that, you know, when you're in our city and you know the small town feel, you know, kind of the vibe that you get from being here. But that's also because of the great places that exist all around our community, from Eisenhower to Strawberry Hill to Cameron Station, all of these different places. And I think finding ways to celebrate and lift that up, whether that's through making activities, or even, as somebody said earlier, finding ways for community to come together, I think is so important. But it also goes to, Peter, what you were saying, if we don't have the basic infrastructure and basic maintenance and things happening to care for our neighborhoods, then you end up with residents who are frustrated and upset about where they live. You end up with people who, you know, don't want to visit here as much. And so I think making sure that we're both celebrating and lifting up the people, but also investing in kind of the infrastructure and the place itself, so that you have these great kind of communities to experience and go to and feel that neighborhood vibe, is important.
Mimi, I didn't want to leave you out. Did you want to respond to that?
Yes, hi, thanks for doing this. I live behind the West Marine store on South Patrick area, that neighborhood there. And so a big concern for me, I went to many of the Zoom meetings about the Heritage Project. And as you know, that is going forward. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I also think of community as being able to walk everywhere, get around. And the fact that their traffic study said with 750 units, it will only impact the traffic by a few, a few seconds. I find that to defy logic. And I spoke to one of the guys that had done the traffic study, and he said that they're doing this smart mobility with the lights, but that should only help with traffic 10 to 15%. And I mean, of course, with COVID right now, it's different, but you know, pre-COVID, the only way I can get into my neighborhood is off South Patrick or Gibbons Street. And so the traffic is quite bad for that. So my biggest concern is just all the development in the Old Town area. And I moved here over 20 years ago, and it was because I liked it how it was, not because I wanted it to be something totally different. And so I understand the need for affordable housing, but it just feels like we have to balance that with the community and being able to get around the community and enjoy what it has to offer. And so I'm very concerned with all the projects. I mean, on the north end, there's at least 3 construction projects that take up a whole block each. So we don't even have that traffic, those people in the mix. The waterfront, that's not full, you know, and then you'll be adding the Heritage and 6 other properties around it that are part of the small business plan that haven't, you know, they're not developed yet, but they're potential for that. And the West Marine store being one. So that's the biggest concern, I think, for me, is it's too much for a small area and will probably ruin everything that we moved here for, I feel. So.
Mimi, you kind of hit the nail on the head for me as well, because I think that's one of the questions that I have for our candidate, one of my closing questions for the candidate as well. So we're going to loop back around to that question on balance. So I appreciate you lifting that up. So I love data and stats. And so I was doing a little bit of research around some of our neighborhood indicators on alexandria.gov. And just to pause, I did put some questions in the chat for some of you as well as captured your responses. But if you could just also drop in the chat if there's anything you love about your neighborhood and what is something that may concern you, just like Mr. Peter started talking about some of the things that concerned him. We would love to capture that as well. So in reviewing the neighborhood key indicators, there seems to be a slight decline, maybe not as significant, but it's still a decline in the percentage of residents who positively view their neighborhood as a place to live. Since FY17, it seems like we've decreased 4 percentage points and now stand at 82%. So keeping in mind that the data also does not offer the area codes of residents who took the survey, which in my opinion could have been a missed opportunity. I'm wondering what factors have always brought you a positive feeling about a neighborhood in general, and how would that impact what you look for in neighborhoods while on council? And I'll open it up to Ms. Gaskins first.
Oops. Sorry, I was trying to get myself off mute and I think I took myself off video.
That's okay.
What's interesting, so one, I have to say, when you pointed out this study to me, I was actually surprised that the city collects this type of data. And so that was something that I was glad to see. I do agree with you that, you know, collecting it at the zip code level probably is important, but I don't know that that would also give us the data we need. It's almost like we're so small and the zip codes bleed across different neighborhoods that I wonder if there's a way to do this in like a block by block or civic association or condo association, something so that you really get to the heart of what's happening in a specific place. In terms of your question around just thinking about how we measure what's happening in community and how people feel. There used to be a study, it was done by the Knight Foundation years ago, and it was called The Soul of Community. And the goal was to measure like how people feel connected to their neighborhood. And the idea was that if cities could understand whether or not people feel connected to their neighborhood, then they could better understand how to plan and invest in different places. So it measured like satisfaction with services, it measured the strength of the local economy, I think openness and inclusiveness. There were maybe like 10 different domains. But one of the things that I always loved, and I used to use this question in a lot of my presentations, was that it asked a question about how much impact do you think that someone like you could have in your community and making your community a better place to live? And to me, that is like a piece of data that I wish we were collecting, because I think it's so critical. If you feel like you can change the place where you're at, I think, or if you feel like you're giving input and that input is received, that input is acted on, or even if it's like a different decision, you at least know how the city got there because it was such a transparent process, or there were feedback loops or ways to show how the decision was happening. I think that piece of like transparency and accountability and people having agency over decisions is like a key piece of how I wish we were measuring and thinking about the strength of our community and areas where we need to improve.
Good luck to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pat, I know it won't be easy, but I think it's unacceptable kind of the way we do it now. Things have improved, but I think this idea of we have a community meeting and it's basically a presentation and then there's like 5 minutes for questions, or people come to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting and they've said the same things, but then there's no kind of sharing or feedback loop as to why the decisions were made. That's got to change. And yeah.
I would just if I'm curious about this point, because, you know, you started the conversation about what neighborhood means to you, and I think community has come up quite a lot. Just in the years that I've been active at the local level on these cut-through traffic issues, participated in the Central Alexandria traffic study, which was really foundational in our understanding of where our problems are in Alexandria. A huge problem is the lack of accountability and transparency of decision making. I would even go so far as to say that don't always trust the data that the city is collecting, because we've experienced situations when the security of surveys, in other words, you know, they'll post an online survey and they'll ask you to respond to, for example, feedback on a traffic study, and they don't do anything to ensure that only residents of Alexandria can respond to that survey. So in other words, and don't get me wrong when I say this, I'm not against biking, but the bike lobby has been very active in mobilizing to get people outside of Alexandria to respond to all sorts of surveys that may or may not be helpful to communities in working with their elected leaders to understand how best to make commuting, and when I mean commuting, you know, not just to work, but also to places around Alexandria, so we could feel like we're part of more of a community. It's making it less effective, and it's creating a schism, I think, between elected leaders on council and people like us, you know, living in various different communities in Alexandria. In fact, over the time that we've been having these discussions on traffic, we've been learning that some years ago, I don't remember when this stopped, but actually there was a time when there were wards, I guess, I'm not sure if this is the correct term or not, but where council members represented specific sections of Alexandria.
No.
And now there is
Peter's correct.
like that.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to just say, you know, it would be nice if we had council members that directly represent different residents in Alexandria. We're certainly a large enough area, and people have already been speaking on this call about how it's fundamentally changing. And I think a lot of us feel like, okay, sure, nobody expects Alexandria to be the same way that it was, that it attracted some of us 20 years ago. But when you start to see that developers have a much greater say in what's happening in Alexandria, and that may or may not support the notion of what community and sort of the way of life that you want to live can be, then it really, my wife and I, for instance, we just recently retired. And we're really seriously thinking twice about whether or not we want to live in Alexandria. We love the street we live on. We like the community that we're a part of, but we just don't like the direction the city's been going in. And, you know, as you get older and you're on fixed income, whatever that income is, you know, you want to make sure that you're picking the right place to go. Just like if you're a young family starting out and so forth, you have the same concerns, but different ones in that respect. I think we all just feel like we just don't have a say, and voting doesn't seem to do that, because even the more recent council members that have come on, I won't name any names, but they've actually taken votes in many of our views to actually make community less of a community where we all live, for things like traffic and so forth.
Peter, I appreciate you sharing your concerns and perspectives. I guess I'm curious, and I'd want to open this up to the group, recognizing that at least in this election and probably a few future ones, we're being elected to serve the whole city, and we're being elected to be accountable to residents across, from the east to the west and everything in between. What do you guys feel you need to see, or what would tell you that we have a more accountable government, or that we're doing a better job of engaging our residents? Like, what would that look like? What should we be striving for and trying to push in your perspective? And that's open to anybody. Just curious your ideas.
Ms. Gaskins, I want to first thank you for even raising these issues. This is Barbara again. I came to the city in '81 to join the city attorney's office, and I have watched both from the inside and the outside the councils over all these years. And to me, the biggest issue is really citizens just don't matter anymore. Citizen associations don't matter. Citizens don't matter. And that's by verbal statements, not just the power of deductions. And I was here in the city, and I used to watch the councils send developers and citizens out in the hallway and refuse to pass things until the developers had worked with the citizens and developed a solution that everybody could live with. And nowadays, you go into a meeting knowing it's all over. I mean, you can say or do whatever you want, but and many times the comments from the podium are, come on, let's get through this. We don't have time to hear, or whatever. It's a clear message that citizens are not valued anymore in this community.
I absolutely second what Barbara says. I mean, we don't have even enough time in this call to discuss that topic
I was just,
at all. I mean, citizens don't count. The only thing we count for is being a wallet and voting members of council back in so they can continue their relationships with the development community. Because developers count and we do not. And certainly people such as those in the heritage area,
right.
Forget it. It's beyond aggravating how little it matters what anyone says. And it's all after the fact. No matter what the issue is, it is decided and it's just pushed through the system.
Thank you, Fran and Barbara. Daniel or Mimi, but Daniel, did you want to chime in? Because I saw you come off mute for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't discount those experiences. It's been different for me. I feel like we've gotten pretty good access to our elected officials. You can contact one on Facebook; they'll reply back, give you the scoop on things that perspective about things that you can't necessarily read on the website. That's pretty extensive. We've got a ton of meetings that meet on everything, just constantly, and try to get in a planning commission meeting for something we were writing a letter of support for the other night. I was like, oh my gosh, all this stuff in front. I mean, they just talk everything through, and that thing is like staffed with citizens and involvement. I think the ways to make it better would probably be, we should definitely continue what we're doing with Zoom. They've said that participation and public comment and stuff like that is just like shot through the roof because everybody can get to it now. That was really hard before, having to go down to City Hall, find the parking, wait all day for timing, stuff like that. I think if they can figure out, I know this is hard, but maybe like chunk the discussion points ahead of time a little better than when they have, if you do a planning commission meeting monthly, and that thing is just a beast of an agenda, it'd be better to just split it into a couple of sessions so that people can like tune in for their specific one and have their say. As far as directly affecting what the character of the city looks like and the officials and things like that, maybe it's more a matter of rallying people to the cause and voting. I can't think of a more direct way to get people to get city council to respond to what we want. Right now, so many of the seats are open that we could really get whatever we want. We could, you can have different people run. Although I think the folks that we have on this call are fantastic. I've been very impressed with them, but I think it could come more from the people that live here. I see that as the most direct way to have an impact, as opposed to developers and stuff like that. I think we end up in that spot where we're listening very carefully to developers because we stay very consistently out of money because we want a lot of services, and that's going to cost a lot of dough. And go ahead.
Dana. Go ahead.
I'll just say this last thing. I mean, the two cities that I've lived in the longest, other than some stints in California, were Roanoke and Richmond. And with wildly different perspectives in those places, I feel like we've got more of a say, less of an agenda, and more like, okay, what are the facts? Let's respond to it with that than I had in either of those places. So for what that's worth.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add, I love what you said about kind of where are the opportunities to change the way we do engagement. So you're right. There are a ton of meetings. I almost think there are too many meetings that like you want to have a lot of meetings, you want to have opportunities for conversation, but there's so many that the average person probably can't keep up with all of them unless they're, going to 10, 12 of these a night. And I often think of my mom who worked like 2, sometimes 3 jobs, and there's no way she'd be able to do that. And so I'd love to figure out, I don't know what this looks like. And I've been trying to look at other cities to see what they're doing, but like, what are multiple ways that we reach people where they are? So I love what you said about Zoom. I also wonder, when the world opens back up again and we're able to do things in person, the health department has a mobile van. Like, is there a way that when they go out to communities, that can also be a place where we're collecting information? When we're doing kind of pop-up events and festivals, like, when parades and gatherings return again, like, are there ways that we can just do short things, not the like 50-page survey online, but like 2 questions, text messages, other ways to just continue to get more voices and to get more voices quickly. So yeah, if folks have ideas on that, I'm all ears. That's something I just want to continue to hear. I also just wanted to touch on your point about, the relationship and the conversation we have with developers, because I do think that one of the things that's beautiful about Alexandria is people want to come here. We're a desirable place. Developers want to build here. And so we're not, we have so many projects in the pipeline now, and we're going to have more coming. And so how do we demand what we need from those projects, all the way to, like where they're located, to the labor that's used, to the design of them, to the affordability. But I think we as council and we in working with our citizens have to be able to say, this is what we want in this place. Let's figure out the development that is going to work for us to get us here, and really driving that negotiation and driving that conversation. Because I think we can. I've seen other cities do it, and it's almost like your lines in the sand. This is what we want. This is what's going to create and build upon the Alexandria we love. So then this is what we need to do to make that happen.
A quick note on that. I don't know what it looks like. I know they do a great job with like communications, with press releases, with COVID stuff, or things like that in that department for the city staff. I don't know what their engagement team looks like for beyond just hold public meetings where you're going to talk to city council, stuff like that. It'd be interesting to see. I wonder if they could staff up and somebody who's like, I'm writing this in plain language. If you're going to talk in like docket and stuff that doesn't make sense to people, like someone as an editor who can say like, we're going to speak English here. And what it looks like for, calls kind of like this one, like an open-ended session. I work for a government agency where we do this. It's been pretty successful. Where you can have people on and discuss these issues, and that's tracked, and that's something you could build on. There's a lot of like pushing the stuff out, and that's good. But I heard some frustration from someone earlier about when we have a meeting or like a planning commission meeting, the things are already, settled and determined. Or with city council, when you go for the public comment, like they've already talked about it, figured out what they want to do, talk to the developers, and there you go. I wonder what exists for that other stuff. They had some things when we had the Cameron Run Water Park situation. We were trying to figure out what to do with it, where they hired Michael Baker to do a lot of community engagement, involvement, meetings and stuff like that for it. I'm like, yeah, I never met the people from the city who were in charge of that. I wonder how big that team is, and could it grow, and could it do more?
That's an interesting point. Oh, Mimi, did you want to chime in on this, please?
Well, I just wanted to say, although I do feel like the city council, I've emailed the mayor, he's emailed me back again with the heritage. This is the first time in over 20 years of being here that I was so concerned about what was happening that I tried to get involved. And so, you know, I did email all the council members and they did email me back just more, you know, I hear you, but as everybody said, I feel like you go to the meeting, and that planning meeting, the heritage started at 9 o'clock. The last one they had went till 1 a.m. So, I mean, they have to be brain dead after a day of whatever they do, you know? And then same with the final meeting with the city council, it was all day long. So to your point of breaking up the meetings when you know you're going to have a big topic, but the planning meeting, I mean, the backup information was 120 pages of things. There was no conversation. So again, to the point of they already had their mind made up, and so they didn't address the concerns of the neighborhood, and so it felt like it was all decided. And then my friend who is more involved than I, she said, you know, if planning says yes, then city council will say yes. And it sounds like, again, there wasn't really a lot of conversation. It's just, it had affordable housing, but no other options. And, you know, because the thought was to have it less, 55 less affordable units to really cut down in the density and things like that. So I feel like you can contact them, but it doesn't really seem like they're paying attention to what, and also what was frustrating is people from outside of the community. Like there were some people in Shirlington from a church who were saying this is a great thing. And I thought, well, yes, it is kind to help people have an affordable place to live, but you don't live here. You don't try to get home in the traffic, you know? So I feel like people outside of the area that's being impacted tremendously, for them to have such a voice was a little frustrating. But anyway, but the community, I particularly picked this tea thing because when I was working, I'm a flight attendant and I'm around so many people all day that honestly, I was happy to come home to my little house and, you know, just peace and quiet. So now with COVID, I'm off until I can get the vaccine. So I miss community, and our neighborhood, people will walk by, you almost, you know, hit elbows pre-COVID and nobody says hello to each other. So I miss it tremendously. And I realized that that's something when things are back up and going that I want to put in my life and get involved in the community, because I do love Old Town, and my husband and I walk all the time, and it's just a beautiful place. So I would like to be more involved.
Thank you. I also want to get into, this is a great conversation, and it's reminded me, because when I was coming up with some of the questions that I have for Aaliyah, Ms. Gaskins, I was thinking, how many council members actually have walked the neighborhoods of Alexandria? And I honestly don't know. I know a few of them, but I honestly have never asked them. I don't know if they know. I think maybe one or two. I know I've done like tours of Alexandria. So I'm just wondering if they, because I continuously hear that we're missing certain people in certain pockets, but how is that possible if we knew all the pockets, missing pockets? So I'm just really curious about that. Aaliyah, a lot of people want to know, like why you, and especially around this topic. So how has your background uniquely prepared you maybe to even help neighborhoods?
Yeah. So I will say, I don't know how many council members are out walking neighborhoods. I can tell you that I am, and that is important to me, because I feel like if I don't have eyes on something and if I don't understand it, then I'm not qualified to make the decision. And I can read all of the data about it. I'll do my homework, but I think people and hearing their stories, there's often, the story behind the data. In terms of what I would say has prepared me is, I'll kind of chunk it into three parts. First, I would just say, I grew up in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a city of neighborhoods. Like I said, my mom worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, but she also didn't have a car. So we took the bus everywhere, multiple buses, moving around on foot, whatever we could do. We took these things called jitneys, which not exactly cabs, but they're just, I don't even know how to describe them, but if you've never taken a jitney, it's an experience. But I say that to say, I've seen when cities don't always work for people, especially the most vulnerable people, and how hard it can be to get back and forth to what you need to provide for your family. I went to get my master's in public health because I was curious about what are all of the things outside of the hospital that impact your health. My mom and I would go to the emergency room sometimes 10, 12 times a year because of her asthma and her diabetes, mostly because of challenges we were facing with our housing and just navigating the city that we lived in. And so I've been fascinated with how do we not just, make big plans or make big decisions for cities, but how do we do it in a way that is really focused on kind of the intersections between housing, transportation, all the way down to our sidewalks, to our schools, but recognizing none of these decisions can happen in silos. They're all interconnected and each impacts the other. And so figuring out how do we build upon those interconnections and how do we do that in a way that's sensitive to our physical, mental, and social health. So that's just a piece that's core and the work and the experience that I bring. I also have had experiences working in cities all across this country. So I've seen what works and I've seen what doesn't work. And so being able to bring those ideas here to the city is something that I think also prepares me for this. I was actually thinking of when you were saying, what are ways that we engage communities differently? And I think somebody had said, you go to the meeting only because the meeting's already decided. And so you want to hear what happens. And it reminded me of, I was doing some work in Kansas City several years ago, and the mayor was launching a participatory budgeting conversation. The idea was that residents were going to have an opportunity to decide how money in the budget was spent. And they broke us into little groups, and I sat next to this lady. They gave her a piece of paper, and she refused. Like, she just was not filling out this paper. And I said, ma'am, I was like, I'm just curious, why won't you fill out the paper? And she looked at me and she said, the money's already spent. I'm just here to see how it's spent. And I was like, no. Like, I'm sure in this case, like, the money is not spent. Like, I think they genuinely want to engage you. And she looked at me and she said, you're a fool. And I said, well, ma'am, I don't even know you. And now we're calling names. I was like, I'm just, let's just do it together. Like, can I just bother you for a few minutes? And she gets this paper and she's looking at it. And the paper literally said at the top, you have, I think, $400 million. How will you divide it? And she's like, I don't even have $500 in my bank account. How am I supposed to know what to do with this? And I was like, okay, let's throw away this paper because I don't understand this activity either. We're going to be here all night trying to figure this out. I was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And I said to her, I was like, what do you want? And she's like, all I want is, I guess the field had overgrown next to her house. She's like, I just want the city to mow the lawn. She's like, there are things happening in that field that aren't safe. She's like, I'm 86 years old and I just don't feel comfortable with this. Why is it taking them so long to mow the lawn? And this person from the city came over and they said, oh, well, you have to write that in your piece of paper. And in case you didn't know, it costs this amount to hire somebody to mow the lawn. It costs this amount for the lawnmower. It costs this amount for the, and just overwhelmed this woman. And she just was like, see, I told you, they ain't going to spend it. They're not going to spend the money. They've already decided, and they're not going to mow my lawn. And I just remember I went past the staff, and the next day when we were meeting with the mayor, and I was like, you should not be proud of this initiative. Don't tell anybody that you're doing participatory budgeting and that you're doing it well. I was like, because what happened in that room is she couldn't even enter the conversation in order to do the budget. And the thing she wanted was shut down so quickly in a way that, we couldn't even have a conversation about it. I was like, I think the idea of bringing people in is great. Let's figure out how we do this differently. And so we ended up kind of completely changing the future sessions. So I share that to say, I've been doing this work in cities. I've seen examples. I've been on the ground, and I've been trying to do that here in Alexandria. And I have a hope and a belief that we can do so much better. And so I know it won't be easy. I know it's gonna, they'll be met with pushback. Change always is. But I think our ideas and our solutions exist with each of you and with others in your community. And we've got to find ways to lift that up and to have a process that we can be proud of, because there's so many cool and good things happening in the city. Let's figure out how to make it work for us. So Sorry, Jennifer, that was a long-winded answer. I got excited. I out my girl.
No, I appreciate you sharing your experience because I mean, as voters, we want to understand who we're choosing to vote for and what you're actually going to be able to bring that may be even different than what we currently have now. So I appreciate the stories on the micro scale that you can offer. So thank you for sharing that. We've talked a little bit about a few questions that came in already too. So I want to go to one that's slightly different from one of our residents on the West End, and she's in the military, and she asks, is there, this is Miss Stanley, she asks, is there consideration for the chief of police or representative from their office to meet with the community to address police issues, especially in this climate, to discuss what should take place during a traffic stop? Our communities need to have a plan before something happens unnecessarily. So it's sounding like she's really trying to get into the issue of that I think council was recently kind of discussing, mental health and policing. Yeah, so I wonder, Aaliyah, if you had any thoughts around that in terms of neighborhoods.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I hear in that question is, what are we doing to be proactive? And I do know that the city has, I think it's a community policing or community oriented policing division in which they do assign a police officer to all of our neighborhoods. And the goal is to, build relationships and build community. I think you were mentioning not only just the conversation around mental health officers, but right now, I think yesterday there was one, and I think last Saturday there were community conversations around a community police review board. And I apologize if I'm mixing up the naming of it, but I think things like that are really important around how do we engage the public in a dialogue about policing, about, what's happening in our community. How do people need to see and engage and interact with their police in order to feel safe, to feel valued, and to feel like they're going to have a positive experience? What's the training and education look like for our officers, but also what's the accountability? So I think, yes, there are conversations. I don't think a decision's been made, but it's perfect timing that that's happening right now in our community. And I do support the idea of, a review board and the idea of greater conversation with our residents around how we are protected.
Thank you. And I think that kind of also leads to one question I wanted to ask the attendees is, because we kind of touched on this a little bit, this kind of goes back to the city having this influx of new construction projects. The city strategic plan has, on its site, it has a benchmark of 64% of residents feeling positive about the overall quality of new developments. But we've been at that 64%, like plus or 1 or 3 percentage points over the past 3 years. So that begs the question, what are we missing to increase that feeling of positivity? So what are we missing when considering new developments that may impact positivity among residents? And I think we've kind of hinted at that. So I would love for maybe even the participants today to start off this question, and then Aaliyah, because I also want to hear from attendees, like, what is one thing that you would like to see in your neighborhood, thinking like down the road in like the next 5 years, or what's your big idea for your neighborhood? If that makes sense. So that can be opened up to anyone.
So I was just going to say I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead, Ms. Mimi.
From our neighborhood, again, with COVID, I just saw it when this is all over, we have an alley, and just to have a block party in our alley would be so great to meet people. And my husband and I are kind of the older people of the neighborhood. We have a lot of young people with kids that have moved in, and I'd love to get to know the little kids and stuff. So for me and just my little neighborhood. But to your question about the 64% with the new development, it might be that people are like me and not, and supposedly Alexandria is the densest city in Virginia. And so, they could be like me, particularly, again, Old Town where I live, it's done. We don't need any more people here. We don't need higher buildings. So it's not that I think the buildings are ugly or anything like that. Although, again, back to the heritage, I don't think that fits the Old Town look, and it's part of it's in the historic part, but it might just be is that people don't want any more development in their neighborhood, that they're just happy with how it is, or concerned about the impact of the schools, the parking, the traffic, things that we've already talked about.
Mhm. Thank you. Any other input around what do you want to see for your neighborhood in the next 5 years?
So I'm on the west end and we know what's coming. We know Landmark
The
Mall
hospital?
is coming,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
We
ma'am.
know a lot of changes in the Eisenhower Valley, which connects Van Dorn to Duke Street. We know the Duke Bus Rapid Transit is part of the plan. And density is out of control here. That we're not going to get any new land. So that's a big concern. In my neighborhood, we are actually all out and about. We're out walking, so we see one another and talk to one another outside frequently. But our concerns are the pending big projects, the big 10-year projects that are going to disrupt all our lives. And, how will that affect people who want to sell their properties, that sort of thing going forward?
I just want to touch on something Fran had said, because I had the pleasure of meeting Fran about a week ago, and we were talking about Landmark. And one of the things that stuck with me since that conversation is we both said, when you hear the conversation about Landmark, some people say it's going to be like Reston Town Center. Some people say it's going to be like Mosaic. There's an article in the Washington Post that said it's going to be like the Wharf. And I think this is our opportunity to not just look at kind of all of these other examples around the region and say, let's pick it up and put it in Alexandria. But this is a space where when we talk about neighborhoods, we're essentially creating a neighborhood. We're creating a whole community at Landmark. How do we figure out what are the best ideas for Alexandria? Obviously, we can take inspiration, but we don't want to be just the cookie cutter piece. What is the thing that we're creating or setting that is a place where people want to go and have this sense of community and all these things we've lifted up, but that it also fits in and it's integrated and connected with the surrounding neighborhoods, and that we're balancing these different trade-offs and conversations around development. So I've just been struck by that ever since. And I even think, Daniel, I know you guys are looking at some big projects in Eisenhower Valley. It's how do we make those funky, or how do we make those the place that works for Alexandria as we design and shape these opportunities, because they're coming.
Well, we could use a little funky over here. I
don't know where that word came from, because I'm clearly not funky. I'm just low on coffee.
I've been called funky. I don't know if they meant that as a compliment. Yeah. So for Eisenhower, so I come from a different perspective on some of the development. I am like, man, bring it here, bring it on. We got blank space. We got giant parking lots with nothing in them. Let's build, let's do some stuff, and let's shape it kind of like you're saying to what we think it ought to be for, the next 100, 200 years that a giant building made out of glass and steel is standing there. What I think is important to preserve, and we really need to look at to make sure that we have a useful, walkable, accessible, friendly, open, neighborhood-driven place, is to not let it become giant towers of density that you just, you can't get into without the building code. That you can't have any, or I guess that you can't have any interaction with. I mean, obviously, you don't have building code, you don't live there, you don't belong in there. But if you're, if you're going to get a haircut in a place, one of the giant towers here is there's a mostly Vietnamese. I know they're owned that way, but mostly staffed haircut place where I go get my haircut in a giant tower here. And I'm just so glad that is down there at the base, at the bottom level. I think it's in the Meridian building. For me to be able to go there and have some interaction with this giant football field shaped block that is down on Eisenhower. Same there for, there's the FedEx that always drives me insane there, and no one has a good experience in those. but the little deli where, you know, we can pick up different kinds of wine than 7-Eleven, you know, sometimes we're pushed. We drink the 7-Eleven wine. You know, I think the way that these are shaped, we absolutely have to have lots and lots of discussion about it. And it has to be sort of a human-centered design on these things. Sorry, I was just thinking about how we don't need to use these big jargony buzzwords for this stuff. But similar to what Aaliyah said about, like, are people walking these spaces before they make something there, something permanent? Are people having engagement with the people that live around it, with the type of people that would live in it, and having some thoughts about how these things might go? I'll give you guys an example of how things could go horrendously wrong. We saw this in Alexandria now yesterday. There's a substance abuse center behind where they're building the Wegmans, which we're also extremely excited about. It's been there a long time, needs to be updated. I think it's fantastic that they have that there and stuff like that. And there's been all this discussion about where to put the affordable housing, because everybody did not like the put it at Minnie Howard because of, you know, save the children. On the other hand, I would say on the other side of that, I have a kid who's going to be going to Alexandria Public Schools, and it'd be cool if his teachers could live somewhere near where he is going to go to school. But they were like, well, let's put the affordable housing and the public or the substance abuse center like right there together, stick it a little bit more in the corner next to these giant buildings. And I'm like, I cannot think of a crazier idea than that. But this kind of stuff like has to get talked about, thought out. That's not a going to happen type thing. That was some contractor proposal that they're going to talk that through. But we have to have engagement around that, and we have to have the good back and forth between the community, not just the very this is my business as an urban planner type person with like lots of stats and figures and reports and PDFs flying around and stuff like that, where they do go figure it out without us around. It has to be brought down to the human level and talked about there, whether someone actually lives there now or not. There's a ton of folks renting in around Eisenhower. They're probably not going to come out to this in droves. They may be living in another city in a couple of years. But there are across Alexandria types of people that may be living in that sort of thing. And there needs to be some sort of way to engage everybody there and figure out like what would look good, what would work. And I put this question to Aaliyah and Patrick. This came up in a planning commission meeting with the developers. There's a lot of talk about like below grade parking, or if you should put it at that first level there, like they did in the building right next to where the Wegmans is coming. Parking garages are not a human-centered design. They're not, you can't go in there and get a haircut in the parking garage, maybe you can in COVID times. But long term, those are not accessible spaces. They're spaces for cars, they're spaces for objects, they're not spaces for people, really. So, should we push these developers to say like, no, you're going to have to put retail in the bottom there. No, you're going to have to put a grocery store in the bottom. No, you're going to have to put a bar in the bottom. You're going to have to do something like that at potentially the expense of them saying like, well, we'll just leave your area a bunch of parking lots. I think there needs to be a balance there. And I thought it was cool that the planning commission really took that apart. They came down on the side of no, they need to be walkable spaces. But I thought I'd open that up to everybody and let you kind of think through that little mental problem there.
That is, I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh gosh, the word that comes to my mind, usually when I work with students, I'm a social worker and a teacher. So I say, what is our checkout word? And if I were to do that with this group, I could already say mine would be balance. Like, how do we find that balance? But because there's so many great perspectives that were lifted up today. So because I want to respect everyone's time and we're about to be at time, but I want to hand it over to candidate Gaskins to kind of wrap us up and close us out. And I'll put some information in the chat for the rest of us, but this is an ongoing conversation. Ms. Gaskins?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jennifer. I thank you for, this was Jennifer's idea to do the whole Tea and Topic series. So I thank you for having this idea. I love getting to meet people and have this space and just open conversation and ideas. I would say if I were to do a checkout word, it would probably be community. And I think, Daniel, what comes through and kind of the remarks you were just making is how are we building and planning and thinking about community at the center of every one of our decisions we're making. And whether that's, what's happening on the first floor of the buildings to the design of the overall buildings to where they go to some of the concerns that Peter and Fran had raised, as well as Barbara and Mimi as well. And so I think balance is a good word, but I also think it's more than balance. I think it's being clear on what's the vision we have for our community, what are the tools we need to get there, and then what are the decisions we're going to make in order to be working in alignment and recognizing the interconnections between these decisions so that then we can hold ourselves accountable to, are we moving towards that vision or are we getting away from it? I guess another word I would just add is hope and excitement, because I think the possibility is here. Each of us is on calls like this or showing up because we care about the city and we want to see it be the best it can be. And we want to see it be a place that we can continue to live in, grow in, and age in. And so I hope that I can play a role in, changing some of the processes for how we do business so that more ideas like this get elevated and there's more spaces to walk neighborhoods and shape conversations like this. So I hope that you'll come back for other conversations. Peter, I saw your email this morning, so I'll just write you an email back because I want to be respectful of the questions you ask. And Jennifer, if there's any questions we didn't get to, just let me know and I'll respond back to those folks. But I hope people have a good rest of your Thursday and a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
This was great.
Good
Yeah.
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.